Hey folks, this is Caleb, and we're here at the Immortal Regiment in New York City. Now, what is this? This is the Immortal Regiment are the people who fought in the Second World War to defeat fascism. And every year there is a parade by Russian Americans and others living here in New York City to commemorate the defeat of the Nazis. Now, people may not be aware of this. Unfortunately, our educational system in the US doesn't do a good job of teaching us about the Second World War, but a lot of people don't realize that during the Second World War, the Soviet Union, the United States, the people of China, the people of Britain, we were all allies against the menace of fascism. The Italian fascists, the German Nazis, the Japanese Empire, they were the enemies of all civilized and decent people in the world for the atrocities they were committing, and we came together. There was a basic human bond between the Russian people and the people of the United States, and this march is much bigger than that. I mean, we got Americans here, we got Russians here, we got Russian Americans. We've also got people from Kazakhstan and Central Asia. We've got people from China here. I mean, this is quite a gathering, and as you can see behind me, people are actually carrying placards with the face of their relatives who fought or died, some of them, in the Second World War, and every single one of these faces has a story. You know, people talk about, you know, their relative who was a pilot and flew planes to defeat the Nazi invaders. We talk about, you know, one woman told me about her relative who had been in the fight to retake Berlin and to liberate Berlin from the Nazis and to take Berlin back for the people of the world against fascism. So, you know, every one of these faces has a story, and there's so much beauty here, and I was shocked. You know, yesterday I went out, I did some interviews on the streets of New York, and a number of people told me with a straight face, you know, totally told me that they were convinced Russia was on the same side as the Germans during the Second World War, and that's simply not the case. And that's just a fantasy, and it was just shocking for me to hear so many people not realize that during the Second World War, the peoples of the Soviet Union, the peoples of the United States, we were allies. We were together to defeat the Nazis. And that this alliance, it actually goes back even further, because during the American Revolution, when we were fighting for our independence from the British, people don't realize that Russia was on our side in that fight, and that they supported the United States and provided aid to us and helped us to win our independence as a country. And it goes even deeper, you know, in New York City, during the American Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was leading the fight against slavery, you know, Russia had recently defeated, you know, their version of slavery, serfdom, and they came to our aid in the fight against slavery in the USA, and Abraham Lincoln had the support of Russia, and here in this very New York harbor that I'm in, we actually had Russian ships come to support us. The Russian Navy came here to support us during the Civil War and came to support the Americans in their effort to defeat slavery. And slavery, of course, was tied in with the British Empire. It was, you know, it was providing cotton to the British so that they could you know, have cheap cotton picked by American slaves to set up their textile industry and become this kind of, you know, global imperial power. They went on to colonize India and such. Well, you know, so there's a common bond, and it's just kind of a bond of basic humanity that has brought together the people of the United States and the people of Russia. And that history of our commonality and our common struggle for justice and our common, you know, outrage about the evils of fascism, that's being largely eroded. There's been huge efforts to try and, you know, just you know, wipe that history out. You know, there was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That's what people always tell me. But that was simply a non-aggression pact. And prior to that pact, the Soviet Union had gone to every Western country. They'd gone to the French, they'd gone to the British, they'd gone to the United States and tried to get them to sign a pact to oppose fascism. And the USA and the French and the British wouldn't do it. And so it was only, you know, as a last resort that in the fall of 1939 you had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signed, and Stalin and the Soviet leaders, they all knew it was not going to last. And eventually they knew that the Germans were going to attack, but it bought them time. It wasn't a betrayal, it wasn't an alliance. It bought them time and enabled them to prepare for the inevitable fight. You know, Hillary Clinton, she actually compared Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, to Adolf Hitler. And we Americans, we heard that, we didn't quite, you know, we just thought, okay, she doesn't like him, whatever. But that's really an insulting thing to say, because the people of the Soviet Union gave 24 million lives to defeat fascism. Some say it's even 26 million lives. So much sacrifice was made by the peoples of Russia, the peoples of the surrounding countries, Central Asia, to defeat fascism. So much of an effort went into that, and that's really forgotten. And for her to use those words, when Hillary Clinton used those words and compared Russia's president to a Nazi, she was really insulting the Soviet people and really insulting the memory of all the millions of people, the people on these placards all around me. So that's something that needs to be remembered. Now, the other thing that's important to remember is that, that Japan was playing a role in the Second World War. They were aligned with the Nazis and the fascists, and they committed horrendous atrocities in the mainland of China. And right now in Japan, there have been school textbooks that have been printed that don't acknowledge those atrocities. There's an effort to kind of cover up the ugly crimes the Japanese committed. So there's this big effort, to rewrite the history of the Second World War as the, the Wall Street and London billionaire elite, as they turn on Russia and China, and they try to drill into our heads that Russia and China are our enemies. In order to do that, they've had to go to great lengths to try and rewrite the history of the Second World War, because the Second World War shows that there's a real bond of human decency and democracy between the peoples of Russia, the peoples of China, the peoples of the United States. We all saw that menace, that monster of fascism, and we opposed it. And that's a beautiful, beautiful moment, and there's been such an effort to erode that in the American mind, and it's very scary, and that's why these kind of gatherings are so important. This is not an anti-American event. This is an event reminding people about what's great about America. During the Second World War, we had a leader named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, before he died, he proposed an economic Bill of Rights. He said that not only should we have the right to free speech and free religion and free education, we also should have the right to a job and the right to an education, the right to health care. And this was how to preserve democracy, because when people are hungry, that's where fascism originates, that fascism flows out of hungry stomachs. And Roosevelt, he was not afraid to align with the Communist Party of the United States, to align with the labor unions, to align with the unemployment councils. Roosevelt was a populist leader who passed great reforms in order to help the American people. So, so much has been rewritten. There have been so many efforts to kind of convince people in the USA that Russia and China have never been our friends, to convince people in the USA that this kind of unbridled free market capitalist greed, that's just who we are, we're greedy, that's what made America great is greed. No. There is an inherent goodness in the American people, a goodness in the Russian people. We have a common bond, and these rallies, these gatherings that take place, the Immortal Regiment every year in the lead up to May 9th, Victory Day in Russia, they remind us of that bond, that the peoples of the United States, the peoples of the Soviet Union, the peoples of China, we all had something in common. We were all opposed to fascism.